Does this Michigan State basketball team remind you of another team? Well, you got to go back about 16 years, but kind of hits the mark.
You are Locked On Spartans, your daily podcast on the Michigan State Spartans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Spartan friends, Spartan family, Locked On Spartans listeners, thank you all so much for tuning in to Locked On Spartans. It's your team in green and white 5 days a week. Please rate, review, subscribe. Really, do whatever makes you happy. We're all in a good mood here in East Lansing. If for some reason you're in a sour mood, well, I don't care. Just get yourself happy. Maybe just watch the replay of the last 5 Michigan State basketball games. Or, hey, stick around for today's show because after it's just me, in segment 1, talking Michigan State basketball, we are joined by a great basketball mind, Evan Miyakawa, evanmia.com. If you're on Twitter, if you're online a lot, you know who this guy is. He's going to tell us everything we need to know about why Michigan State can make a deep run in March, what players he's loving for Michigan State. But right now, we're going to hop in the time machine because yesterday, in the post-game show with Justin Thin of 24/7 Sports, I asked him, hey, doesn't it feel like 2019 all over again? You could even, talk yourself into being 2020 again, right before COVID shut down that season. And what I meant by that is that in the middle of the season, late January, early February, this team kind of hits a snag. They have an annoying 4-game stretch just like Michigan State did this year. But hey, like in 2019 and 2020, well, they rallied. Okay, they had some tough games down the stretch, especially in 2020, ending the season against 4 ranked teams, had to win them all to win the Big Ten title. And while the hay is not in the barn for this 2025 team, it's close. All right, they're on the doorstep of a Big Ten title. Kind of a lot of comparisons. So I actually went to barttorvik.com because, well, another fantastic website. You can compare the resume with this current team to, what other teams are they most closely resembled to in Michigan State's past? And it's not 2019. It's not 2020. You got to hop in the time machine and go back 16 years to 2009 to find a resume that compares to Michigan State's, 2025 resume, the closest. All right, so right now, Michigan State in the offensive efficiency and adjusted defensive efficiency, 116 offensively. Okay, they're hanging around 92 defensive. Now, what that efficiency number is how many points on average you're scoring out of 100 possessions. It gets adjusted by, how strong the opponent is. Are you in a home, neutral, road venue? So there's a little bit of science behind the numbers, but that's a long way of saying Michigan State, solid offensively, really good defensively. 2009, okay, their offensive efficiency was 114, and they had a defensive efficiency of 90. Okay, so both solid offenses, certainly much higher than average, but their defense is really where they made their bread and butter, right? Elite defense and also elite rebounding with this year's team and the 2009 team, okay? Right now, the 2025 team, top 20 in offensive and defensive rebounding percentages. If you want to go back to 2009, they were top 10 on both ends of the court, offensive and defensive, for rebounding the ball. So, hey, the 2009 season, it ended as Big Ten regular season champs, kind of like how we're hoping to do here in the next few days. And, well, guys, actually, ironically enough, that team also ended their season number 8 in the AP poll at the end of the regular season, kind of where Michigan State seems to be parked at for the rest of eternity right now, that number 8 spot. But, hey, nevertheless, they still ended the season with a Final Four banner. They actually made it all the way to the national title game before running into that buzzsaw North Carolina team. But the road there was not easy. Beat Kansas, beat Louisville, beat UConn, and then, of course, that North Carolina team happened. But, guys, they also started their March Madness run as a 15 seed against Robert Morris, which you're seeing a lot of bracketologists have Michigan State as a 2 seed against a 15 seed Robert Morris. Also, if you want another parallel, well, Michigan State, they won those games against Kansas and Louisville in the Indianapolis Midwest Regional. Where's the Midwest Regional this year? Hey, that's right. It's Indianapolis. So, yeah, a lot of uncanny parallels that you could draw here. So, I also understand this, that 2009 was a while ago, and that people born in that year are currently in high school. So, we are going to do a little history lesson right now. Let's go back and, talk about some players that were on that team in case you forgot who they were, or if you're a high school listener, which what a show to stumble upon in your youth. Let's do a history lesson here. They had a guy by the name of Kalen Lucas. Okay, now he was a sophomore in this season, but he was a talented underclassman who was a 3-level scorer that also shot 39% from 3. Hey, you know any other underclassman that's a 3-level scorer that's really coming on late in his season that also shoots exactly 39% from 3 right now? Oh, is that Jase Richardson? Like, that's an uncanny parallel to make right there. Now, okay, Kalen Lucas was more of a pure point guard. Jase Richardson, yes, he does handle on-ball duties. So, like, if you want to nitpick, fine. Your prerogative. I'm just telling you, 2 guards, both underclassmen, having very similar seasons at this stage of the year right now. Goran Sutan, okay, he was a big man who it's kind of a slow rise for him to find his footing here at Michigan State. He was never, like, god-awful, but certainly, you know, a good example of, hey, sometimes it takes 3-4 years to really come along in college. Now, he was a great rebounder, also could step out and hit a shot. Does that remind you of one Jackson Kohler, a guy that's really blossoming as a third-year player here that is an elite rebounder? And, oh, yeah, well, just ask any Illinois fan, can step out and hit a shot. If you want to keep going, hey, Raymar Morgan, wing player, plays with a lot of energy, really strong defensively. He occasionally has these offensive bursts. Fine, if you want to attach that to Frankie Fiddler, by all means, go for it. If you really want to go nuts. Travis Walton, that's a guard that comes off the bench. He provides an incredible amount of defense, well, just like Trey Holloman does. Now, Trey Holloman, much more offensively gifted as a player than Travis Walton. But guys, hey, if you're in this good mood right now, you want to keep these parallels rolling, go for it. I'm not going to stop you. Maybe someone in the comments will, but I'm not. Jarrell Summers, you want to compare him to Jaden Akins? Guys that play the wing, they can get hot from 3. Sure, go for it, guys. But yeah, there is a lot of parallels, a lot of mirroring each other from 2009 to 2025. So, look, it's a strong offense, you know, but more importantly, it is elite on defense. Just like this year, just like 2009. And actually in 2009, from February on, so when that calendar flipped to February, when it got to be winning time for Tom Izzo, they held 4 teams to 50 or less points, okay? And then just 4 teams scored 70 or more. This team right now, the 2025 team, they are right now holding 6 straight teams to under 70 points. They are elite on the boards, just like we've said. It's the cocktail you want heading into March, without a doubt, guys. Now, we're going to head into the mailbag here. This was sent last week, so we're going to update a few of these numbers. But T. Anon wrote in about 10 questions, so sorry we're not going to get to them all. Sorry it took us a little bit to get to this. But the first question was, did MSU break Illinois? Started 13-4, were ranked as high as number 13, and then they were 4-7 and dropped from the rankings since stepping foot in Breslin Center. So just to update that, Illinois is actually 6-6 after leaving Breslin Center, okay? Great. Very helpful win against Michigan. So we're not going to turn this into like an Illinois hater parade. We've had many of those shows on this program. Now, I want to turn my attention to Michigan really quick. And again, we're not counting the chickens before they hatch. We're not saying that, oh, wow, how'd they blow the Big Ten like that? Like, no, there's still a realistic shot they can get a share of this title. We're not going to discount that. What I'm going to hate on right now, yeah, believe me, there's a lot of hate between the fan bases. I do a lot of it. They do a lot of it on here. If you ever read our comment section, whatever it is, like there's 1,000 barbs being thrown through football season, basketball season, but there's one more that I'm just not even going to entertain anymore. And it's whenever they speak up and say, oh, no, we're a basketball school. We take basketball seriously. And sure, like they have like fans. Like we've had some on the show, of course, Chris Castellani, Greg Waddell. We're going to have someone actually tomorrow, Joe Cook-Sugart of 131 Sports. Great bracketologist. So like there is a little community of fans. Do not ever put us in the same category, though, as far as fandom, prestige, and tradition goes, because as you're watching Michigan get their teeth kicked in by Illinois on senior night, with a Big Ten banner still squarely on the line. It's not like they had the super outside shot. Like, no. They control their own destiny. A solid opponent is coming into town. It's a Sunday afternoon game on CBS, and tickets were going for like $5 before tip. You looked at the camera shots of Chrysler. That was a 2/3 full gym that they were playing in. Let me read that all again. It was senior night. You know, not just some random mid-December game against some lower major school. There was a Big Ten banner on the line. It's not like there's 7 games out. Illinois is coming to town. Yeah, this isn't like Penn State coming in. You know, they're just trying to hang on to a Big Ten tournament berth. No, that's a legit opponent. Sunday afternoon game. This certainly wasn't a Tuesday at 10 p.m. game. everyone had an open calendar here to at least watch a Big Ten championship team, you would think. But no, tickets are $5. And I love affordability for tickets. But there's like accessibility, like $30 or $40 tickets. And then there's just a straight up absence of fans. So no, as I'm looking at Michigan State, pack the gym. Cheapest tickets for this upcoming Sunday's game are like $360 over the weekend against Wisconsin. I think at tip-off they got to $190. No. This is what a passionate Big Ten basketball fan base looks like. Not whatever's going on down the road. So don't let them ever entertain that conversation ever again. So T.A.N. also writes in, best Lake Michigan beach town. I got to go with Grand Haven. And then what's your number one Big Ten football destination still on your bucket list? I got to go Madison. Our brethren over there in Wisconsin. All right, guys, we're going to get to Evan Miyakawa here in a hot second, talk all about Michigan State basketball. But first, need to talk your ears off about new friend of the program. We're talking Supply House. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is a reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help get you and the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Now, need help with an order? Guys, how about this? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for the trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it is your turn. Turn the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. If you like numbers, if you like college basketball, and if you like Michigan State, well, I got a feeling you're going to like what Evan Miyakawa of evanmia.com has to say, but I guess I shouldn't put words in your mouth, Evan. How do you think this conversation will go for our Red Hot Spartans here?
I think this is about as good as it's been all year to talk about, and to be honest.
There we go. Got you at the right time. Perfect. Hey, look. We're rolling hot into March. Obviously, all the cliches out there. Tom Izzo thrives in this month. They're peaking at the right time, this, and that. We've seen this team, what they could do defensively, rebounding, all this and that. Why do you think that Michigan State can do some damage, though, in this month of March, Evan?
Right now, I have Michigan State as a top 10 team in the country, and that's not just saying how good they've been so far. That's saying how good I think they're going to be going forward. Okay. That's the best in the Big Ten. And I think the thing that's really impressive about this team is something I track on my website is roster rank. So it basically looks at the talent you have on your roster. Michigan State clocks in 23rd in the country in roster rank, despite being top 10 in the country right now. What that means is that Izzo has these pieces playing bigger and better than the sum of the individual talent. And something that I specifically was looking at last week after some big wins for this team is that no other team in the country has more guard depth than Michigan State. When you look at Michigan State's top 4 guards in Richardson, Akins, Holloman, and Fears, and their rating on my website in terms of the impact that they were having on their team, no other team in the entire country has 4 guards with a higher BPR rating than Michigan State. And I absolutely love that because people talk about it. Guard play wins in March. I think sometimes that cliche is a little bit overused. Okay. But in the case of Michigan State, I think that the fact that on a given night their guards are going to overwhelm and outplay the other opponent is a good sign for this team. And so that's something I really like about this team going into March.
Now, BPR is a stat that you mentioned. Now, let's imagine that someone out there is 7 years old and they're listening, or the host that you're talking to has the brain of a 7-year-old, just hypothetically, of course. What does that mean? What does BPR mean when you're spewing off all those numbers, man?
BPR stands for Bayesian Performance Rating, and it's the main metric I use on my website to quantify the overall value or impact that a player has on your team on offense and defense when they're on the court on a given possession. So that looks at your individual stats, how efficient you are. It also looks at the impact you have on team performance. When you are on the court, are you positively influencing how your team is performing, regardless of whether you're scoring 25 points per game or 5 points per game? Every single team needs 5 guys out there, and different players have different roles. And there are some guys who are star players who score a lot, and there are other players who maybe aren't your secondary, even third option, but when they're on the court, they're doing all the other things well, and it shows up in how the team performs. It accounts for all of that and kind of predicts going forward how good you are going to be on offense and defense. So when you take all of that into account, Michigan State's best 4 players are their 4 guards. There's not really a whole lot to separate them. I think Jase Richardson right now is the highest rated player, but there's not that far of a drop to the 4th best player on the team in Jeremy Fears, and then you've got your bigs clocking in after that. But this team's forte is their guards, and to me, I think that that's a good sign for them because they don't over-rely on one guy to have a good night and win the game for them. There's a lot of different options there, but I mean, we've seen it, earlier this season, I think, especially in their win against Michigan, for example. Michigan State came into that game with better guards. You could say Michigan had the better bigs, but ultimately it was the guards who won that game, and that's often what we see in the tournament.
And the story of the season has been, amongst like the defense, the rebounding, is of course the depth Michigan State has. And I know you just touched on that, like the top players. Obviously, the guards have been doing well in East Lansing. But is there like a player that you don't think is getting enough respect, or your ratings giving someone a lot more love than, maybe the common fan's eyeball is giving?
On the defensive side of the ball, I've been very impressed with what Zapala has done. Now, on the team, offensively, he's not really bringing much, if we're being honest. He has the lowest offensive rating on the team. But part of why he gets the minutes that he does and plays in some of Michigan State's most effective lineups is because of the defensive impact he's had. So when you look at his impact on Michigan State's performance, on average, Michigan State is giving up about 87 points per 100 possessions, and that's adjusted for the level of competition that they're playing. When Zapala is on the court, that drops significantly in a good way. It's down to 81.5. That's the best mark in the entire Big Ten. So when he is on the court, there is no team playing better based on when a specific player is on the court than when Zapala is there defensively. And so I think that's part of why he still has an important role in this team. And if you could take that a step further and you look at the best defensive lineup in the entire country in terms of points per 100 possessions given up, it is that lineup of Fears, Akins, Holloman, Kohler, and Zapala. Those 5 have been incredibly impressive as a unit on the defensive end for this team.
Incredible. In the nation? Is that what you said? That's
yes.
Wow, I knew things were going really well over here. I did not know that we had amongst the 5 most elite of the defenders over here. And look, we've obviously celebrated the defense, all season long, especially during this recent win streak they're on. Primarily, we look at that fun box score number of, hey, you know what? Other teams are shooting horrendously from behind the arc at 3-point land. Give a lot of credit to the wing players, the guards. But it sounds like there's not much of a drop-off between like the wing players and the front court, for example, on defense. Is that kind of what you're seeing too? Yeah.
There's still been a lot of positive contributions. I mentioned Zapala, but really like you look at other players kind of in that upper stratosphere of defensive rating on the team. You've got Jaden Akins actually leads the team in defensive BPR, but then Kohler is there and Cohen Carr is there. Obviously, we know his athleticism and how he's able to hang with players defensively. And so really, there's not a lot of players on this team that you're kind of suspect on defensively. The only player who really has a massive drop in defensive impact on a per-possession basis compared to the rest of the roster is Frankie Fiddler. The metrics just haven't been quite as good with him on the court, but obviously he brings a lot on the offensive end, and so he kind of makes up for it.
Yeah, and that's interesting, too, because he played really well against Wisconsin. But, yeah, if you want a larger sample size than that, who might argue any set of numbers, especially ones that I have a hard time keeping up with sometimes, admittedly. But I like a lot of the numbers they have over there. Before we move it along, say, hey, what could potentially hurt this team in March? I know to bring it down to a pessimistic level is probably not what State fans want in such a joyous time. But is there any other big numbers that jump out at you at the page that could get Michigan State fans excited?
Well, I think it's kind of emphasizing the depth that this team has and the way that other opponents have to guard them in kind of a different way than normal is. A lot of good teams often have a go-to scorer where you know that if you lock that guy down, you're going to shut down the rest of the offense. And certainly we've seen Jase Richardson kind of be that player for this team down the stretch because he's really unlocked a gear that we didn't see from him in the first half of the season, which has been awesome. It's great when you have a player down the stretch who you weren't really counting on at the beginning of the season to be that big, and he's been that. But by and large, when you look at the player skills on this team, something that I have on my website is projections for all of these different skills, and one of them is scoring. Now, when you look at the top scorers in the Big Ten Conference in terms of projected scoring on a nightly basis, Michigan State does not have a single player inside the top 14 players in the conference in scoring. Sure. And yet, when you look at the per possession impact, there are so many guys who are reliable and kind of in that conversation. And I kind of like that, because when a team doesn't have an option of say, hey, if we can figure out a way to take this one guy away and not let him get his, this team's going to struggle. That's just not the case with the Michigan State team. So I like that. Obviously, I think, something that this team can struggle with on a given night, and we can get into this further if you want, is the lack of three-point shooting. That's been pretty well documented on this team. But in terms of just, we don't have to always win the same way. The fact that they don't have like that one guy who's going to score reliably 15 points per game, I think is actually a good thing, because as we've seen, Tom Izzo is able to scheme up different ways based on the opponent to win. And so, especially when you have a coach as good as Tom Izzo, I don't think you're going to be in many situations where you're like, hey, we can't buy a bucket and we cannot figure a way to tweak what we're doing in the game. Izzo's obviously really good at that. So, I'm fine with it.
Before we get to, what could be the Achilles heel of this team, let's talk about what it does take to be successful in March, because we all know the cliches. Guard play, you just said, defense, you want to be a good three-point shooting team. You got to have a guy, which, you kind of just debunked right there. What do you really see, though, when you just take away the cliches and start looking at it from an actual data-driven outcome here? What really helps in the month of March?
So one thing that I've always been paying attention to, and this is going to end up being a slight negative in the Michigan State column here, is a lot of times teams in the tournament end up reverting towards preseason expectations, especially based on the talent that we thought that roster had coming into the season. What I mean by that is you might have a team that was a top 5, top 10 team in the preseason, and they underwhelmed significantly. Maybe they squeak into the tournament or have a much lower seed than expected. Oftentimes, those are the teams that often outperform kind of what their seed line is in the tournament. And then you start to kind of see hey, we knew this team was good. They were kind of underwhelming during the season, but when the tournament happens, the lights are bright. That's really when they show up. We've seen this countless number of times. I remember a couple years ago, this was the Michigan team as an 11 seed was one of these teams where they were highly regarded in the preseason, massively underwhelming, and then they ended up making a really deep run in the tournament, compared to what you'd expect for an 11 seed. So oftentimes I'm looking for teams like that who have been kind of underwhelming, but we know the roster talent that they have. And so this year you look at teams who have been kind of, underperforming relative to expectation, teams like Gonzaga, teams like Kansas, teams like, you can even throw an Arizona in there who's been kind of up and down, but they're obviously loaded talent-wise. Those are teams I often identify. And on the flip side of that, sometimes teams that have massively overachieved based on the roster talent that they have kind of have a ceiling in terms of how far they can go. They can obviously still make a Final Four, but they might be a little bit outmatched in terms of talent. That's kind of the category that Michigan State falls in. Now, I do not think that means that they're severely limited in terms of their ceiling. Because when you have a coach as good as Tom Izzo, kind of all bets are off in that sense, but that's often something that you see kind of in the tournament.
So the not fun topic of conversation, and of course you got to bring it up because, yes, we're skipping through the daisies here during this 5-game win streak, but we got to look at it from all angles, right, guys? There's only 2 teams that are immortal. It's Duke and Auburn, and then everyone else has something that could undo them in the tournament. And I'll start by saying this because on evanmia.com, you guys do a nice job with the tournament simulations, and you ruined my lunch because I did it today, and 2-seed Michigan State falls to number 15 Montana right off the bat. So 2-part question, what gives, man? And then number 2, why? What undid the Spartans? Is it just as easy as the 3-point shooting, or is there something else that really sticks out to you?
Well, I was just looking up that game really quick. The way that these simulations work is there's a baked-in game probability based on how that matchup plays out, and then it kind of flips a weighted coin in that sense. So in that matchup, Michigan State would have a 96% chance of winning, so you just happen to fall in the 4%.
I feel special.
So not very likely to happen there. I think obviously, the 3-point shooting lack thereof has been well documented. And so I don't need to go too much into that. I think everyone kind of understands that that's a weakness of this team. Yeah. But that also is something that, other teams, it is a little bit harder to take away the 3-point shot than it is to take away points in the rim or points in the paint, because oftentimes 3-point shooting can just kind of be more of a variance luck game. And sometimes you can have great looks and miss them. Other times you can have more difficult looks and make them. So the fact that Michigan State relies more on the 2 than the 3, I don't have a huge issue with that. But if we're looking at something outside of 3-point shooting, I've been actually looking at some of the key metrics for Michigan State this season in terms of when they've played well and when they haven't. And it comes back to their defense again, because the defense is their strong suit. The thing I have found is that forcing turnovers, Michigan State forcing opponent turnovers, is a big key to their success. So this season, when they force at least 11 turnovers in a game, they are 16-0, and they've played really well in all of those games. Okay. When you look at games when they cannot force turnovers and when they play teams that have better ball security, they're only 7-5 in those games. And so all of their losses have come when they only force 10 or fewer turnovers. So when we're looking in the tournament and we're looking at potential matchups that could be tricky for Michigan State, I look at teams who are not as susceptible to Michigan State's defensive pressure and teams who are going to be okay against their guard-heavy defensive attack there, and are going to be more secure on the ball. And I think that could be the kryptonite for this team in March.
So I don't know if you're in the prediction industry or not. Obviously, you got all the numbers and the data, but I'm just going to, throw you right into it because, hey, it's a talking head show. What would I be if I didn't ask you, Evan, how far is this team going in March? Come on.
I think a Final Four is definitely on the cards. But here's the thing.
Okay.
This year's one line, especially if you're looking at the top 3 1 seeds, potentially Duke, Auburn, and Houston, they're all really, really strong, and in my opinion, much further ahead of the pack than everyone else. So if as a 2 seed or 3 seed, Michigan State ends up in one of those regions, it is going to be a tall task getting past one of those teams to get to the Final Four. So if that's the case, then I think Elite 8 is perfectly reasonable, because there is no shame in losing to any of those teams. If you end up in a region with Florida or Tennessee or Alabama, then it's a little bit more open in that sense. Yeah. So for me, I think you want at least a Sweet 16. I think an Elite 8 is certainly in the cards. And then kind of depending on the region you get in, that Elite 8 matchup against a potential 1 seed there really does kind of change how likely a Final Four is for this team.
And not to throw you on the spot, this is as Michigan State's, hopefully climbing towards clinching that Big Ten title. The Big Ten tournament is on the horizon. You mentioned that Michigan State is getting a little more out of their roster than what you have them rated as. Who in the Big Ten is underwhelming? Is there a complete flip-flop team out there that's doing worse that comes to mind?
Well, I mean, one of these teams is Indiana, and
sure, yeah,
Indiana. That's an obvious one. Indiana's roster talent coming into the year was arguably the best in the entire conference, and they've been underwhelming. But my model kind of saw that coming for Indiana. I think they had a top 10 or top 15 roster according to my analytics in the preseason, but I had them ranked in the 20s just because of the track record there and how they've kind of underperformed in that way. So again, Indiana could make the tournament, and maybe that's a good sign for them that things are kind of rounding into form and things are finally gelling for them. But we're talking top of the leaderboard here. Michigan has been kind of one of those teams, roster talent-wise, my analytics have always been really high in their roster. Right now they're ranked 17th in roster quality in the country, but down to 27th in terms of predicted team strength going forward. So that Michigan has a Final Four caliber talent on their roster, but it's been a lot more hit or miss for them recently. I think largely speaking, most of the Big Ten has done pretty well with the pieces they have. Ohio State's been another disappointing one. I think their roster is better than how they performed this season. But you look at teams like Wisconsin, for example, Wisconsin has no business being as good as they've been this year. Their roster rank is 39th in the country. That's barely good enough to make a tournament in most situations. And yet they're 11th in terms of predicted team strength going forward on my website. So they've been outstanding with the pieces they have. And so obviously, one of the best coaching jobs in the country there at Wisconsin. But by and large, there's not really a lot of other teams other than who have been underwhelming compared to roster talent, other than the teams I already mentioned in Indiana, Ohio State. And if you want to throw Michigan in there, you can, though they could still end up having a good end to their season.
We'll throw Michigan in there. Yeah, why not? Anytime we could, slight them a little bit on this show, yeah, we'll always take that for grabs. Really quick before we let you go, this is just more of a personal question, but with March Madness coming, how much pressure do you put on yourself to have a great bracket and run your bracket pools? Obviously, you are all things college basketball. You have all the numbers behind you. Or have you been able to separate that when you do get in the bracket pools of hey, it's March, crazy things happen. Take us through the mind of Evan during March Madness here.
It is really, really hard to like every year have a good bracket because a lot of it comes down to looking for bracket value. So 2 years ago, my official bracket was in the 99.5th percentile on ESPN. So it was awesome. But last year I noticed that a lot of people, UConn was the best team in the tournament going into it, hands down. Yeah. But a lot more people were picking UConn to win the title than what my probabilities had for them. And so I thought, if I'm going to win my bracket pool and get in those upper echelons, I need to pick a winner other than UConn. And I ended up picking Auburn, who was a really strong team in UConn's region, and they lost in the first round. So last year wasn't so hot. So to me, I don't put a lot of pressure on myself to, be there, because ultimately, if you're trying to thread that needle and kind of make sure you have a really good bracket, it can't be elite because you got to take some risks in order to kind of beat what everyone else is doing. So really what it comes down to more is, if you look at all of my bracket simulations, the majority of those, or at least, a good percentage of those, should finish above average compared to other brackets that are submitted. And it's really that really shows the quality of how good your team metrics and game predictions are, because it accounts for the right amount of variance, but not too much, if that makes sense.
Glad I'm not the only one on this conversation that had Auburn win the whole thing. I also had St. Mary's in the Final Four. I also had Kentucky in the Final Four, and I forgot the fourth team, but I had all four of my teams eliminated before the first week, and even that did. It was a real good banner year for the Sheehan household for the bracket pools. Got beat by my then 3-year-old child in the bracket pool.
Oh, boy, that's rough.
Anyway, so that's what kind of ball knowledge you're working with over here, Evan. Guys, that's Evan Mia of evanmia.com. Anything you want to throw out here before we let you go enjoy the rest of your week, my man?
No, you're good. Yeah, if you're unfamiliar with my site, you can find everything at evanmia.com. There's free stuff, but there's also stuff for subscribers. And when it comes to filling out your brackets, I think the most helpful tool that I have is this hypothetical matchup preview, where you can put in any two teams, even if they're not already scheduled, and you can see how the matchup breaks down, the probability, the predicted game scores, and all of that. So if you want to say, for example, Michigan State against Auburn in that Elite Eight matchup, and that's kind of how the bracket plays out, you can actually plug those teams in and see how they would fare and match up against each other, and the certain matchup specific things that I'm looking at. And that's a really helpful tool for filling out your bracket. So if you're interested in that, you can go check that out at my website.
I will be interested in that. That will be my Bible for this March. I'm not just going to go off vibes like I did last year. That led me to absolute despair. All right, guys, we will be back tomorrow. You already know it. It's Locked On Spartans. We do this 5 days a week. Now take care of yourselves. Have a great week. Love you all. Go Green.